Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Last week I had the opportunity to see the Ai Weiwei exhibit at the AGO. Ai Weiwei uses his art, his actions, and his blog to ask important questions in China about freedom of expression, about accountability, and about human rights. He does this fully aware of the risks to his safety and physical health. In 2009, he was beaten and detained by Chinese police in his hotel room. In 2011, he was arrested and confined for 81 days. Currently, his passport has been seized by Chinese authorities so that he cannot leave China. He is under constant surveillance by a hostile and authoritarian government. Some of the most poignant parts of the exhibit were the three pieces he created in response to the May 12, 2008 earthquake in Sichuan province, where over 5,000 children were killed when shoddily constructed school buildings collapsed. A total of more than 70,000 people died. Ai Weiwei founded the Sichuan Earthquake Citizens Investigation Project, whose purpose was to identify and publicize the names of the youngest victims. He was motivated to do this because the Chinese government not only refused to acknowledge, investigate, prosecute anyone, or take any responsibility for the colossal tragedy and devastation, but instead it harassed and threatened parents who protested publicly, and it bought promises of silence from many others in return for $8,800 and pensions. One of Ai Weiwei's pieces was a snake that was suspended from the ceiling. It was made from the children's backpacks that he found scattered among the rubble. A second piece was an entire wall from floor to ceiling that contained a list of the names of the more than 5,000 children who died. In addition to their names, he included their ages, gender, birth year, school, and class. His comment on the piece, "A name is the first and final marker of individual rights, one fixed part of the ever-changing human world." In another piece, he recovered twisted steel bar rebar from the collapsed buildings, and then he and his crew painstakingly straightened all of them out. And he created a piece that reflects the fissure both of the ground and in the society. Ai Weiwei's art reflects the profound depth of his belief in the value of individual life. That belief inspires, and sometimes to inflammatory levels, his sense of duty and his dedication to advocacy on behalf of individual rights and freedoms. I was powerfully moved by Ai Weiwei's humanity and by how similar his values are to the values we find in our sacred texts. Genesis teaches us that every human being, every child, is B'Tselem Elohim, made in the image of God. The Mishnah teaches us that every human life, every child's life, has inherent dignity and value. It says, "Whoever destroys a single life, it is as though he has destroyed an entire world. And whoever saves a single life, it is as though he has saved an entire world." I couldn't help but be reminded of the vulnerability of our children and of our obligations to them. Children are a blessing. Not only those in our own families, but the children of the congregation, the community, and those across the nation and the world. I've spoken before about the unacceptably unacceptably high number of children in the GTA who live in poverty, almost 1/3 of them, and of the 25% who experience hunger at least once a week. But this morning I want to talk about two different issues which impact our children. The first is gun violence. On Monday morning, I awoke to a news story about a shooting at a middle school in Reno Sparks, Nevada, where John and I lived for 3 years before coming here to Toronto. The shooter was a middle school student. The weapon he used was a semi-automatic handgun. And the victims? The boy wounded 2 students and killed a math teacher before turning the weapon on himself. About 20 to 30 horrified students witnessed the shooting. Another 700 students who attend the school will learn about it. We don't know yet why this happened. He was described as a caring and considerate boy, and there is some suggestion that he had been bullied. On Tuesday morning, I awoke to a news story on CBC Radio about a shooting in the East End of Toronto. The shooter has not been identified, but the victims are 2 teens, a 16-year-old who was shot in the chest and a 19-year-old who was shot in the lower back. Both were taken to Sunnybrook Hospital and are expected to live. Too many mornings, we wake up to news stories about gun violence in our country and in our community. Too often, children are involved as shooters, victims, or witnesses. Although other crime is down in Toronto, gun violence is on the increase, a 22% increase from 2011 to 2012. And Toronto has one of the highest rates in the country for youth firearm violence. Even one child's death or injury from gun violence is too much. Equally unacceptable is the growing number of children forced to witness their peers using or being harmed by guns. Rabbi David Saperstein of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism challenges us not to remain silent in the face of tragedy when he says, "Our gun-flooded, violence-prone society has turned weapons into idols, and the appropriate religious response to idolatry is sustained moral outrage. Can we find our moral outrage?" On Yom Kippur, I spoke about the power of speech and the power of silence. Either one can be used to create or to destroy, to comfort or hurt. I spoke about how our tradition takes so seriously the power of speech that nearly 1/4 of the sins we confess to have to do with our speech. There's a particular kind of speech that I didn't talk about on Yom Kippur that is equally powerful and destructive: cyberbullying. In Florida, 12-year-old Rebecca Ann Sedgwick had been cyberbullied for more than a year by 15 middle school children before she took her own life on September 8th of this year. A year ago, 15-year-old Amanda Todd of Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, took her own life after relentless physical and online bullying that followed her even after she changed schools several times. Stories of online bullying are not new. Bill Pelsi of Alberta was the first to coin the term cyberbullying back in the 1990s. But the increasing number of avenues for and incidences of bullying in social media and the rash of cyberbullying-related suicides in the past year have caught the attention of many teens, parents, schools, and politicians throughout Canada. Cindy Seddon, a middle school principal in Amanda Todd's hometown and the author of 2 anti-bullying books, describes a mushrooming cloud of cyberbullying. So what do we know about bullying and bullies? Bullying is rampant. A University of British Columbia study found that 64% of kids have been bullied at school. And that study was published almost 15 years ago in 1999. A 2010 study shows that nearly 50% of Toronto middle and high school students have been cyber-bullied. We know that bullies are often children in pain themselves. Seddon says, hurt kids hurt other kids. The degree of their meanness is so easily heightened because cyberbullies are anonymous. We know that bullying can lead to low self-esteem, social isolation and withdrawal, depression, eating disorders, and self-harming. And children are more likely to report bullying to their friends and not to the adults in their lives. Judaism values every human life and calls upon us to respond with compassion and action. The Torah teaches us not to remain indifferent. It teaches us not to stand idly by when the blood of our neighbors is spilled. Torah teaches us to pursue justice and peace. The prophet Isaiah teaches us to end violence, to beat our swords and spears into plowshares and pruning hooks. We have a moral and ethical obligation to our children, to all children, not just those that live in our own neighborhoods, but those who live citywide. How do we beat our swords into plowshares? How do we end the violence of guns and the devastating impact of cyberbullying? A few ideas and challenges for us. We can educate ourselves about the issues. We can advocate for our children. We can join our voices with the voices of the interfaith community on their behalf, whether it's gun control or anti-bullying legislation, or policies, procedures, and codes of conduct, or social programs, or access to mental health services, or the allocation of public funds. We can work in partnership with our schools to make them safe for all children. We can get involved with programs that teach children conflict resolution skills, classes that address personal development, mentoring and tutoring programs, organizations working to keep children safe. We can adopt a struggling public school. At home, we can model healthy conflict resolution and internet etiquette. And most importantly, we can talk to our children and make it easier for them to talk to us about anything. And we can give them the skills, including the love and self-respect and self-confidence that help to keep them safe. The Talmud teaches us that as parents, we must help prepare our children to lead a moral, holy, and professional life. It also says that we must teach our children to swim. You might ask why. Because their life may depend on it. During the days of the Talmud, travel frequently required traversing bodies of water. Often the small boats that were used to make such trips would capsize. A person who couldn't swim would drown. So this obligation to teach our children to swim is really about teaching our children the survival skills that they need in their generation. How to be safe around guns, how to respond to bullying, how to ask adults for help. If you share my passion, my commitment, and my conviction that as people of faith, we cannot remain silent, but must speak and act courageously and forcefully to address the needs of our children, please let me know. Let's work together for our children and our future. Amen.